Hello and welcome to another in our series of Sustainability Natters. I'm Esau.
I'm Beth.
I'm Mark.
And today we've got Mark in here to talk to us about a massive issue to do with sustainability, of course, and it's the big Green Five. Now, Mark, begin by telling us what's that all about?
So it's an approach led by DIO, Defence Infrastructure Organisation, Strategy and Plans area, to try and drive forward some initiatives using the FDIS, the Future Defence Infrastructure Services contract in the delivery regions, to try and achieve some sort of sense of coherence and drive behind green initiatives within infrastructure and defence.
And are you sort of afflicted, as many other people are, with making sustainability issues sexy?
Wow, sexy, there's a word. I mean, I don't know about sexy so much as, I guess in a room where everyone's shouting, it's quite difficult to get people's attention for something that may feel like it's not urgent. But that's the creeping nature of climate change. It's not necessarily just slam bang, single events every day. It's a creeping issue, and we've just seen recently the recent studies that have said that the 1.5 degree increase in global temperature has already been breached much earlier than was anticipated. So, it's accelerating, and the issue we've got is really trying to do our bit in defence within the government apparatus to try and achieve the goals that we've been set to try and address climate change.
And talk to us a bit more about that. So what particularly or especially do you do in defence to advance sustainability? I'm assuming it'll involve things like relationships with your suppliers, things of that nature. Talk to us about that.
So, I mean, I came into this role August 2022, so about 2.5 years in now, having spent around about 15 years in the RAF, mostly to do with infrastructure. Did a little bit of work on green initiatives and with the RAF and sustainability related work and projects. In terms of what I do now, it's evolved quite a bit, and that's not a huge surprise given, I guess, the challenge that we face. There's a massive amount of complexity when it comes to sustainability and how you weave that into projects and how you actually figure out what the right way forward is. And I mean, I've worked in the technology industry, a long time ago in telecoms, and it's a really fast-paced environment, and this feels similar because of the amount of technological improvement that we've got. So, you put your eggs into a solar basket, and the next thing you find is it needs to be a decarbonisation basket, and that's really hard in terms of long-term planning. So, my role really has been a little bit of firefighting, a little bit of troubleshooting when it comes to figuring out how best to assist the suppliers and the regions and the TLBs, the top level budget holders like Army, Navy, Air Force, Stratcom, DE and S, with maybe fathoming out the best way forward, and when they have figured out what they want to do, trying to help get those ideas to fruition in terms of projects and initiatives. So quite a lot of varied work in a lot of areas and I am a one-man band, so I'm kind of the SME of everything, but also the jack of all trades, more the jack of all trades.
No, I mean, obviously you said that you've got 15 years experience with the RAF, especially in infrastructure. So, I mean, really you're best placed to kind of say that and to the impact that it will have on personnel, but also seeing that. Do you think, have things changed much since you were there?
I would say yes, and I think if I cast my mind back to when I originally joined the Air Force, 2008, 2009, I would say for the first, bearing in mind my first infrastructure role was 2010, I don't remember sustainability being mentioned once. And if I fast forwarded then to 2020, 10 years later, there's a sustainability team in Air, and all the other TLBs also have climate change and sustainability teams as well. That means from the top down, there's certainly a recognition that there's a need to do something, and we now see both TLBs and DIO heavily engaged with the suppliers in terms of finding out what the most sustainable way forward is. So a massive sea change in little more than a dozen years, really.
Well, that's good to hear. And obviously, so you lead the Big Green Five. So what actually is the Big Green Five?
Well, there's a question. Okay, so I mentioned what the context and background and why it's come to fruition, what it is earlier on. It's 5 approaches to infrastructure or infrastructure-related activity, really, that's been put into a programme for myself and under the Centre of Excellence banner to try and work with our FDIS supply partners and find, I guess, a more efficient and effective way forward, which quite timely because on the drive down here from Merseyside, I'm listening to Nicky Campbell on, I think it was Radio 5 Live, and he's talking about the current government and the Chancellor and where the money should go, and quite clearly that leaves us with a bit of a challenge because we know the state of the public finances and we know that things have to be done to try and be as efficient as we can while still remaining effective. So this initiative is quite timely, really, because one of the things that we do find is we've got 4 regions. We've got 3 suppliers covering those 4 regions. That, when it comes to things like the supply chain and bidding for energy management system equipment or EV chargers, if you're doing it split by 4 or split by 3, you're not going to get the best bang for your buck. You're also going to be doing things differently in terms of how you maintain assets and how you sustain buildings. So if that's the case, then we've got a bit of a mixed approach when it comes to defence, and not a particularly efficient one. And the idea of the Big Green Five in pure sustainability terms is to get the FDIS supply partners really working with one another to find a common way forward. And that common way forward, it encompasses all sorts of things. It's things like design, EV charge being the first one of the 5 really, design, specification, standards, back office software, so how you manage the data of who's using it and when. Third-party use, although that's a slightly challenging issue because it's meant to be designed for white fleet at the moment, not for personal use, but clearly there's demand there for personal use. So this is a series of 5. It's called a programme, Big Green 5 programme. And I think, just to be clear, a lot of people think that a programme really is in infrastructure terms, is all about projects. Just to be clear, this is about a programme of activity, and the activity itself should lead to some major benefits within the projects. And that, hopefully, in terms of output, is going to see us have at least 3 in this initial push, 3 framework contract agreements between the suppliers in terms of how they're going to work together going forward. And that should start to see some real benefits in terms of savings and in terms of efficiencies.
So let's talk about funding for a moment. Oftentimes these things do cost money.
They do.
How easy are you able to get that funding? And, when you talk also about the changes that occur, especially in sustainability, you talk about one issue and then before you finish talking about it, some other part of it crops up. How do you manage those with the funding issue?
That's a good question. So the advantage, and you alluded to it earlier, is having come from that military TLB background in infrastructure, and I guess it shouldn't have been a massive surprise, but it's really not so different in DIO and MOD. But you end up in the military and in the infrastructure world playing whack-a-mole. All right, so today, what's the highest priority? Well, it might not be the same as yesterday's highest priority, and tomorrow's highest priority is probably going to be something different. And that's what I mentioned before about everyone in the room shouting. The art of, I guess, being in infrastructure, whether that's in the military or the civil service, is really understanding when people are shouting in a noisy room, how do you get your voice heard, and how do you understand how best to prioritise who's shouting the loudest,
And how do you set about doing that?
So I think from my perspective, it's about listening to people. It might sound odd when there's a lot of noise, but if you listen for long enough, you'll hear what the issues are, and from that, you can usually start to decipher whether or not somebody's saying something for, and this isn't a criticism, but for local interest. I've been there, I've had to play that card. You're representing your unit, your station commander or your head of establishment is telling you that something's a high priority. It may well be at local level, but I think when you get into headquarters roles and when you get into Ministry of Defence Civil Service and DIO, you've got to kind of look above that and look at a higher level. That's really important because that allows you to decode what is actually a really high priority across defence or potentially a high priority at local level versus just what might be a more of a local agenda to try and push, and therefore asking for funding. And one of the classic things that I don't see it so much now in my current role, but I'm certainly used to it from my RF career, is people saying that something is critical, and I wouldn't necessarily say fixing a toilet in a block when you've got 7 or 8 other toilet blocks you could use is necessarily critical. And it's not going to compromise operations, which is something that gets bandied around a lot. So the important thing is listening, understanding, deciphering that information, analysing it, and then coming to some conclusions, and then using the processes that are in place and the policies in place to figure out the best approach, and then give your advice going forward. In terms of funding, as you mentioned in the original question, you've got to be able to make, especially in the sustainability terms, a really good and compelling case for why it matters, right? So we know there's government targets that have to be hit by certain points, and that in itself provides a little bit of pressure for the TLBs and to the Ministry of Defence to try and meet them. But it's a bit more than that. And then one of the things I've found is people forget why the sustainability is here in the first place, and that is to do with climate change. So there is a need to, in some ways, almost securitise the language that you use of climate change. It is a security issue. And I think certainly in terms of Air Command, and it's not the only experience out there. And I know Navy had an issue at RNAS Yeovilton, the Naval Air Station down in Somerset, with flooding. But from my perspective, the securitisation aspect is writ large in one of the winter storms that we now seem to get that I don't recall having many of when I was a youngster. And watching literally 15 minutes after it happened, a storm that was tearing through the southwest of England lift off a massive chunk of the Airbus maintenance hangar at RF Bryce Norton. So then you've got risk to life, you've got risk to operations because of the nature of Bryce and what it does. And then suddenly you're like, okay, do we really not want to take sustainability seriously? So that is part of the compelling case. It's that resilience, it's that security aspect. And the other aspect, and being frank in the climate that we're in terms of funding, is saving money. If I could champion some of the activity of the FDIS suppliers at the moment, it's that they're really, really good at providing us with the bullets to fire for the TLBs in terms of justifying why that investment is worthwhile. So if you've got a building energy management system, which with the requisite sub-metering attached to it can give you the Utilities Management Bureau data, the UMB data, that's going to enable TLBs to say, why have we got that building switched on with full heating and full lights on, till 8 o'clock in the evening during summertime, and suddenly you see an energy bill go down by 50%, then that allows them to do the analysis that basically says, okay, well, if you put a building energy management system in this unit, then potentially it will pay for itself within 2 to 3 years. Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you this. So it's a political question, this, but when you see, floods in England, more ferocious, lasting longer, more frequent.
Yeah.
Fires in Los Angeles, for example, again, more frequent, more intense. Does that almost sell your case for you for sustainability and the need for it?
That's a good question. That is a very political question, so I better be careful where I venture. So it's an interesting one. So we took the Los Angeles wildfires as an example. So you look at the political discourse in the United States at the moment, and you've got very much a Republican versus Democrat approach. The Gavin Newsom, who's the governor of California, and the people that work under him or with him in terms of the governance of California, come in for a huge amount of stick because they reduced certain levels of funding for the fire department, amongst other things. And there's been criticism from Republicans, in particular from Donald Trump and those who work around him and for him, in terms of them not being prepared enough, not caring enough. It's their fault. And I think, okay, let's listen to that and hear. And in real terms, it's not going to help if you're going to reduce your ability to fight fires in California. But it's not the reason, it's not the cause. And if you think that California is meant to have a rainy season, or at least a comparatively rainy season, they're meant to get 4 inches of rain by this point, between October and now. And at last count, when these fires first started, it was 0.16 inches. Doesn't take a scientist, and I'm not, to be able to figure out that there's a correlation there. And this is happening more and more, and the science and the data bears out the fact that this isn't just an accident. It's not down to investment in firefighting equipment. It's not down to governance of a state. It's down to climate change.
And I guess that kind of highlights the importance of your role, that we are trying to find ways to be more sustainable and do that better. So obviously with you lead the Big Green 5 programme. Presumably that's 5 different areas?
It is. I have done my classic thing of cantering off into talking about something else and segueing around, but that's me to a T, especially after 2 coffees this morning. So Big Green 5, yeah. So I'm really genuinely enthusiastic about Big Green 5. And you can fire a lot of blanks in infrastructure in terms of initiatives, especially in the sustainability world, because there's so much uncertainty out there. What I'm really pleased about with the direction I've got from the strategy and plans leadership is 5 clear topics that we know can have an effect now. We know they work. So if you're happy, I'll talk through each of what those 5 things are. And I've already alluded to an extent as to what we're trying to do with them. But the first one is EV, so electric vehicle charging infrastructure, or EVCI as we call it. EVCI has been a struggle. It was a struggle when I was working for the RAF, and it might seem a really simple thing. And I'd just say to those people out there who are watching and listening to this podcast, you will potentially be thinking, how did Defence get it so wrong in terms of rolling out something so simple that I can just go down to Tesco or Sainsbury's, other supermarkets are available, and basically just plug in whenever I want to do my hourly shop, a weekly shop for 1 or 2 hours a week. That's fair. That's fair. But does that supermarket have complex electrical network capacity issues? Does it have an infrastructure that was built in maybe the 1940s or 50s, which to a large extent on many sites there's been a mend and make do attitude just to try and be efficient as we can, and you've got limited data on which to base your assumptions? Has that supermarket got issues with network capacity, which means that there needs to be a request to the DNO, the district network operator, to request more power? Sounds a little bit Star Trek, but yeah, more power, Mr. Scott, because actually we're about to breach that by putting in these 4 new buildings and 45 new chargers that go with it. No, they don't. They don't. And well, they may do, but it's going to be fairly rare if they do. So we've got a really complicated and challenging estate to deal with. And when it comes to electric vehicle charging infrastructure, we've struggled to think in many ways over the last few years, have a centralised approach. This is a number of TLBs with sites all over the UK and internationally. We've got to find out the answers to a really, really difficult series of questions when it comes to EV. What do we do? Where do we go? Is it going to be electric vehicle charging in the future? Actually, there's lots of conversations being had about that isn't ultimately going to be where we end up. It's going to be hydrogen. So there's all these potential red herrings or potential alternative and superior solutions that you've got to grapple with. Now, why that matters is it creates a sense of inertia when it comes to decision making. It makes it far more challenging because you're unclear about what it is you're actually trying to achieve. What I'm pleased to say is that the DIO strategy and plans area are working on a national electric vehicle charge infrastructure solution with 1 supplier potentially across the UK. Now, that should pretty much be rolling out over the next few months. It's been delayed. And the elephant in the room here, I will say it is funding, because for all this, it costs money. It's expensive. And yes, we know that there's positive outcomes, and yes, we know it's going to reduce emissions and potentially reduce costs as well. But you've got to get the capital investment in, and the central funding that had been hoped for hasn't materialised, and that's pushed that project back quite a lot. So, Big Green 5 EVCI working group has been set up by myself chairing it, with the suppliers from Mighty, Vinci, and Vivo, and also with Liz Donald's team. I'll give her a bit of a plug because she's been really supportive. Liz Donald's team from Strategy and Plans, who are leading the national solution, they're working with a company called PA Consulting. So they've come in almost as to listen, but also to learn and also to contribute the benefit of their experience to help with whatever transition happens in the future, whether that's in a year, 18 months, 2 years. For now, that leaves us with a gap, and that interim solution that we need to plug that gap to bring some sort of level of coherence and efficiency and effectiveness to the network so that if you have a long journey to make, you know where it is you're going to, what kind of charger's there, how you actually connect to that charger, because we don't have that really at the moment. All those fundamental building blocks. That is part of what we're working on with the Big Green 5 for EVCI, and it's being led by Vinci, and they're through myself. We're collaborating with Vivo and Mighty, running a series of working groups. The latest one on Monday this week, to build what is effectively a how-to guide, a manual really for what the suppliers do, and make sure all those stakeholders, whether that's end users or people within the projects themselves or DIO at local level, whoever is involved with electric vehicle charge infrastructure, will have something that can use as a handrail for how it's meant to work across defence. And a big part of that is bringing that coherence, is bringing those standardised design specifications, and even things like standardised base. So I pull into the car park today. I think there's 3 or 4 chargers here at Whittington. I take a cursory look on my right-hand side, and I didn't even know they were there until about a year of coming here. And they were pointed out to me during a meeting, so now I always look. All bays taken up, none of them with people charging vehicles in, mainly because I think there's a real comms issue out there about understanding, do they work? How do I actually access them? How do I pay for things? So we're trying to clear as much of that as we can up.
Sounds really positive.
Yeah, we've got an indicative timeline for it. We're hoping to have like a draft guide that we can start to socialise with all the stakeholders across DIO and the TLBs by the end of this month, early Feb, and from there we'll add on and build in any other aspects or clarify any points that need clarifying, and then we'll get that guide out there. That's the first stage, and then obviously subsequent stages are, okay, you've said you're going to do it, suppliers, and then they are reaching back into industry expertise from within their own parent companies. They've then just got to make it happen. So it's one thing building it, it's another thing using it, and that'll be the second stage, making sure it's being used.
Let me ask you 2 questions in one, since you're seated right here. Might as well, why not? You've got the issue of comms in terms of getting the message out there of the importance and the need for sustainability.
Yeah.
Why are we even still making that point when to many it may seem obvious that climate change is happening? It's a reality. It's a fact of life. First question. Second question, how do you feel as a civil servant sitting on such a very contentious and contested issue on sustainability? There are people who still deny climate change. How do you navigate that sort of almost impossible thing to navigate, really?
Okay, so what was the first question again?
About communicating.
Communicating,
Yes.
Okay. Actually, I would say, and again, I'd harken back to where we were, even probably 18 months ago, that there's regular contributions now to the DIO Centre of Excellence newsletter. So I have a standing agenda item to update on Big Green 5, plus anything else that comes up. And that's successes and or challenges, depending on what's going on at the time. So communicating through different methods, such as this podcast, I think that there's a lot more discussion and debate, which is healthy, by the way. And I'm all for skeptics, because if there are skeptics out there, that at the very least allows us to refocus the arguments as to why we do it in the first place. So healthy to have the debate, healthy to listen to the points of others who don't see our perspective. We don't need to agree, and I may not change their mind and they may not change mine, but always important to try and remember that communicating what you're doing and why you feel it's important. It's not like the conversation's been closed down. In fact, if anything, it's well opened up, and I want that to continue. How we communicate that with TLBs, well, actually they're in a very similar boat. They're fighting the good fight from within, Air Force, Navy, Army, D&S and Stratcom as well. They're making the case for funding. They're trying to communicate key issues as they come up as well. And I think more broadly, if we look in the media, not really a day goes by. I'm looking at a seat over there right now that's orange. And this morning, a certain organisation that wishes to stop oil was in the news again for, shall we say, Charles Darwin's grave didn't fare too well versus the paint that was applied to it this morning. So that's been in the news. So it's not going away, right? So I don't view this as a quick, everyone agrees, right, let's jump on it right now conversation. It never would be. It never is for most things. It's a creeping, slowly evolving situation, which it feels entirely natural. The second question, remind me again.
So the second one's got to do with basically the idea that, it's a contentious issue, that there are people who still are climate change deniers. And in your role as primarily a civil servant, how does that make you feel?
Frustrated at times. I'm not surprised. We've got to think about here, this is a pan-generational issue. And if I could talk to some of my friends' parents, not necessarily mine, because they, despite being quite conservative in their use in many ways, actually wholeheartedly agree that climate change is a thing. It's man-woman induced, and humanity's got to do something about it. So that for me is a fairly straightforward thing, because you've got a basis for agreement. That means then you can debate the best way forward. And where myself and my parents disagree is along the lines of how we tackle it and what should be invested in that. Whereas for others, I've got friends' parents who are, dare I say it, very, very sceptical about the whole thing. Some people think it's a hoax. It's down to those who want to believe that to maybe look at the evidence and look at the science and the research and decide what they want to decide. I mean, for me, with the Big Green 5, I've got 5 initiatives which I feel the outcomes will be obvious, and you can almost take the outcomes away from being related to climate change and just say, it makes good business sense, and that's one of the key pillars of this. It's the right thing to do as a business. It's not just about sustainability and climate change. There's an ancillary benefit as well.
And so obviously you've got just touched again on the Big Green 5. So obviously we went through electric vehicles.
We did.
What are the other 4?
So the other 4, we've got building energy management systems. Again,
Okay.
Similar thing, framework agreement, and I mentioned what they were before, so I won't reiterate. But effectively, that is your control mechanisms at a site level, feeding data into, and we are looking at having a joined up system, but feeding into a data system that then gives you all sorts of stats and tells you whether there's a fault in a building that may mean that the underfloor heating's been left switched on, even though it's June or whatever. So it gives you that ability to control and manage your energy consumption. And again, that one's been led by Vivo, who through Project Phoenix have had quite a lot of experience in this field and are very much taking the lead, and their draft guide to BEMS is not too far away from completion. I think we may see something by the end of this month. And there's certainly buy-in from the other suppliers to follow their lead on that. The third one is for LED lighting. Seems a really simple thing. Why would we need to focus on that? Surely most of the estate now is LED. It's not. The vast majority of the estate still isn't LED. There's all sorts of issues around it, which I won't go into in this podcast, but in simple terms, it's something we know works now, but it requires people who understand how to change light fittings and electrical networks. So slightly more complicated. We had the second working group on LED yesterday, being led by Mighty, and again, confident they'll come up with a framework agreement, having reached back into some great expertise within their parent company by the end of January. So that's the third one. I'm going to jump to number 5, which is kind of linked to data. So what we're talking about in terms of BEMS, building energy management systems, and how we get that data. That's going to build number 5, which is effectively something called the 8% Club, and that's a register of all those projects that we've done or are doing, which realise an 8% cost saving based on that project in terms of energy efficiency savings, and therefore energy efficiency savings mean carbon reduction. In terms of emissions reduction. That will kind of fall in line with how the BEMS evolves. And the fourth one, which I'm really quite passionate about, having suffered from this, and I mentioned the electrical network earlier on, so I don't need to contextualise why it's important, but we have a major issue with network capability, capacity and condition. So I'm working quite hard with the Royal Air Force, who are kind of leading the way through Project Electra at the moment, and with DR Technical Services and Andy Dunn, who's the lead for that, on coming up with a template for a survey that is comprehensive enough that it gives an idea at site level of really what the condition is, what the current capacity is, what the capability of that network is and where you may, as a TLB, wish to invest if you're going to do things on that site. Now, it's really important because a lot of this stuff requires planning out to 5, 10, 15, 20 years even. But if you don't understand the state of your electrical network, then you're effectively building a house on sand. And what the electrical network surveys are meant to do, certainly from an electrical utilities provision side, especially as we move towards the electrification of the grid, the green electrification of the grid, that's really a fundamental building block for sustainability. So for me, the first point of call, get the survey right, make sure that there is the right information in order to then understand what you need to do, capacity, capability, condition-wise, on that network in order to do what you want to do as a TLB going forward.
Well, it seems as though, this is a lot of work for you to do, Mark, and rather you than anyone else. So thanks for taking the time to join us.
You're more than welcome.
Yeah, thank you for making time in your very busy sounding schedule. So thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And we'll be back on the Sustainability Podcast next time.